Good evening, and welcome to another tale from the shadows of history. Tonight we're heading to the windswept coast of Cornwall in the 1920s, where the American Prohibition created fortunes for those brave enough, or desperate enough, to sail contraband across dark waters. You're not a gangster or a mastermind. You're just a fisherman trying to feed your family when the sea stops providing and the land offers nothing but debt. This is the story of how ordinary people become criminals, not through choice, but through the grinding necessity of survival. So settle back, close your eyes, and let the sound of waves against Cornish granite carry you into a world where every tide might bring salvation or disaster. You wake at 4 a.m. because that's what fishermen do, have always done, will always do until the sea claims them or the land forgets them entirely. The cottage is cold, the kind of bone-deep chill that seeps through stone walls built 2 centuries ago by men who understood that Cornwall offers beauty and little else. Your wife Mary coughs in the next room, a wet sound that's been getting worse since winter settled in and never quite left. The medicine costs 2 shillings a bottle, and you haven't seen 2 shillings together in 3 weeks. You dress by feel in the darkness, pulling on the same wool sweater your mother knitted before you were married, before the war, before everything changed. The holes are bigger now, but wool is wool, and the Atlantic doesn't care about your dignity. Your boots are by the door, salt-stained leather that's been resoled twice and won't survive a 3rd winter. But they'll do for today, like everything else in your life that's held together by stubbornness and prayer. The village of Penven sleeps around you as you walk down to the harbour, 37 souls clinging to a handful of cottages that perch on the cliffs like birds that forgot how to fly. Most of the men work the boats when there's work to be had. The women tend gardens that fight the salt wind for every potato, every turnip, every green thing that might keep families alive through another bitter season. The children learn early that the sea gives and takes according to its own logic, and human plans matter about as much as human prayers. Your boat waits at the end of the stone jetty, a 20-foot fishing smack called the Mary Catherine after your wife and daughter. She's not much to look at. Clinker-built hull painted a fading blue, single mast, sail patched in 6 places with whatever canvas you could beg or borrow. But she's seaworthy, which in Cornwall is the only virtue that matters. You've owned her for 8 years, bought with money borrowed against 3 good seasons that never came again. The nets need mending, as they always do. You work by the light of a hurricane lamp, fingers moving through the familiar ritual of knot and splice, checking every mesh for tears that could mean the difference between a meal and another hungry night. The twine is rough against hands already cracked from salt water and wind, but the work is meditative, purposeful. This is what you know: boats and nets, tides and weather, the weight of fish in your hands and the sound of gulls fighting over scraps. But lately, the nets come up light. The herring runs that fed Penven for generations have moved on to other waters, following currents that no longer bring them close to shore. The mackerel are scarce, the cod smaller and fewer each season. You blame the big steam trawlers from Plymouth and Falmouth, ships that can drag nets large enough to empty whole stretches of sea. They take in a day what the village boats used to catch in a month, leaving nothing for the small men except debts and the slow realization that their way of life is dying. 3 months behind on the rent now, Mr. Henley in Truro has been patient, but patience doesn't pay his bills either. The cottage belongs to his family, has for generations, rented to fishermen who worked these waters when fish were plenty and life was hard but possible. Now it's harder and barely possible, and you see the calculation in his eyes when he visits. How long before it makes more sense to rent to summer visitors from London, people who want to play at being rustic for a few weeks and can pay real money for the privilege? Mary needs a doctor, but the nearest one is in St Austell, 12 miles inland on roads that turn to mud when it rains, which is most of the time. The cough has been getting worse since Christmas, deep and rattling, keeping both of you awake through the long nights. She tries to hide it during the day, covering her mouth with a handkerchief that comes away spotted with blood she thinks you don't notice. But fishermen notice everything about their world, especially the things that threaten to take it away. Tom, your son, 16 years old and stronger than you were at his age, talks about leaving for London or Liverpool, maybe finding work in the factories or the docks. You can't blame him. There's nothing here for young men except the slow decline of watching their fathers fail at the only life they know. But losing Tom would mean losing the extra pair of hands that make the boat viable, the strong back that can haul nets when yours starts to give out. It would mean watching your family scatter like leaves in the Atlantic wind. That's when you first notice them. The cars that drive through Penvin after dark, expensive motors that have no business on these narrow tracks that barely accommodate a farm cart. Rovers and Bentleys with London plates, moving slowly through the village like black sharks testing the water. They don't stop at the pub, don't ask directions, just cruise through and disappear into the countryside beyond. Strange cargo for a forgotten fishing village where most families consider themselves lucky to own a bicycle. The Green Man pub starts staying open later, unusual for a place that normally closes when the last fisherman finishes his pint and stumbles home to his supper. Now there are lights burning past midnight, voices carrying across the harbour in accents that aren't Cornish. Irish maybe, or London rough. Harry Tregenna, who runs the pub, suddenly has money for new barrels, good whiskey, meat pies that actually contain meat. His wife wears a new dress to church, nothing fancy but clearly shop-bought, not the homemade woolen cotton that's been the uniform of Penven women for as long as anyone remembers. Old Jeb Hartwell, who fished these waters for 40 years before arthritis bent his hands into claws, mentions casually that he's thinking of buying a new boat. Not a used smack from another village, but a real fishing vessel, maybe even one of those diesel-powered jobs from Scotland. When you ask where he'd find that kind of money, he just taps his nose and winks, the gesture of a man who's learned the value of keeping certain knowledge to himself. You're not stupid. The pieces fit together like a net mended in the dark, each connection leading to the next until the pattern becomes clear. Prohibition in America has created opportunities for men with boats and knowledge of quiet waters. The newspapers are full of stories about rum runners and bootleggers, fortunes made by those willing to risk everything for the kind of money that can change a family's future in a single night. But this is theory, distant and abstract, until the night you decide to check your nets under a new moon. The Mary Catherine cuts through water black as tar, her engine puttering quietly while you navigate by instinct and the faint gleam of phosphorescence in her wake. You're half a mile from shore when you see the lights. Two vessels, one much larger than the other, meeting in the darkness like conspirators. You cut the engine and drift, watching through the darkness as shapes move between the boats. Voices carry across the water, but you can't make out the words. What you can see are the silhouettes of men passing cargo from the larger vessel to the smaller one, working quickly and efficiently. Crates and barrels, the kind of load that fishermen recognise even in near-total darkness. This isn't fish being transferred. The smaller boat turns toward shore, and you realise with a chill that you know her lines. She's the Sarah's Dream, owned by young Billy Tremaine, a boat barely larger than your own. Billy, whose family has fished these waters for generations, whose father died in the war and left him to support a mother and 3 sisters on whatever he could pull from an increasingly empty sea. Billy, who's been looking better fed lately, whose boat has new rigging, and whose sisters have been wearing shoes that didn't come from the church charity box. You let the Mary Catherine drift until the larger vessel disappears into the darkness, then start your engine and head home with your nets still unchecked. Sleep doesn't come easily that night. You lie beside Mary, listening to her laboured breathing and thinking about Billy Tremaine and his mysterious cargo, about the cars that drive through Penvent after dark, about the money that's flowing into your dying village like a tide that lifts only certain boats. The morning brings rain, as it usually does, driving horizontally across the harbour on a wind that carries the taste of storms brewing far out in the Atlantic. You're mending nets in the shelter of the boat shed when Patrick O'Malley finds you. He's not a name you know, but he carries himself like a man used to being known, dressed in a good wool coat that somehow stayed dry despite the weather. His accent is soft Irish, educated but not refined, the voice of someone who's learned to speak to different kinds of people in their own language. "Fine boat you have there," he says, running a hand along the Mary Catherine's hull with the appreciation of someone who understands craftsmanship. She looks seaworthy, well maintained. "She gets me out and back," you reply carefully. Men who compliment your boat in weather like this usually want something more than conversation. "I'm told you know these waters better than most. The channels, the rocks, the places where a man might come and go without attracting attention." O'Malley's eyes are pale blue, the kind that seem to see more than they should. There's work available for men with the right skills and the right discretion. What kind of work? But you already know, have known since you saw Billy Tremaine's boat in the darkness. The kind that pays well enough to matter. £50 for a night's work, maybe twice a month when the weather's right and the moon's dark. He mentions the sum casually, but £50 is more than you've seen together in 6 months of fishing. It's doctor's fees for Mary, rent paid up through summer, food that doesn't come from whatever you can catch or grow. Dangerous work, then, to pay so well. You set down your needle and look at O'Malley directly. The kind that might leave a man's family wondering why he never came home. Every kind of work on the sea carries risk, but this is business, professional, men who know what they're doing, working with people who value discretion above all else. O'Malley pulls out a cigarette case, offers you one. The tobacco is Turkish, expensive, nothing like the rough shag most Cornish fishermen smoke when they can afford tobacco at all. The Americans have made some foolish laws about what their people can and cannot drink. This creates opportunities for those willing to help correct the situation. You take the cigarette, let him light it for you. The smoke is smooth, almost sweet, a luxury that reminds you how long it's been since you've tasted anything that wasn't strictly necessary for survival. And if the authorities take an interest in these corrections, the authorities are men like any others. They have families, mortgages, debts. They understand that sometimes the greater good requires a certain flexibility in enforcement. O'Malley's smile doesn't reach his eyes. Besides, the cargo we're discussing never touches British soil. It goes from ship to ship in international waters, then continues to its destination in America. No laws broken, no harm done. It's a lie, of course, or at least not the whole truth. You've lived on this coast long enough to know that customs officers don't get rich by being flexible, and boats that meet in international waters don't always stay in international waters. But it's a comfortable lie, the kind that makes it easier for ordinary men to do extraordinary things when their backs are against the wall. "I'll need to think about it," you say, but you both know the thinking's already done. The only question is whether you'll admit it to yourself quickly or spend a few days pretending you have other choices. Of course, but don't think too long. O'Malley drops his cigarette and grinds it under his heel. Opportunities like this don't wait for men who can't make decisions. I'll be at the Green Man tomorrow night having a quiet drink. If you're interested in discussing details, join me for a pint. He walks away without looking back, leaving you standing in the rain with the taste of expensive tobacco in your mouth and the weight of £50 pressing against your conscience like a stone. You finish mending the nets, but your heart isn't in the work. Instead, you're thinking about Mary's cough, about Tom's plans to leave for the city, about the bills that pile up like storm clouds on the horizon of your small, precarious life. That evening, you sit by the fire and watch Mary try to hide how much effort it takes to climb the stairs to your bedroom. Tom reads a magazine someone left at the pub, full of stories about London and motor cars and opportunities for young men with ambition. The fire burns low, and you don't add another log because coal costs money and winter isn't finished with you yet. You think about Billy Tremaine and his mysterious midnight cargo, about the cars that prowl through Penven after dark, about Patrick O'Malley's pale blue eyes and the casual way he mentioned £50. You think about the difference between right and wrong and how that difference becomes harder to see when your family is hungry and the sea provides nothing but empty nets and broken promises. The rain continues through the night, drumming against the windows like fingers tapping impatiently on wood. By morning, you've made your decision, though you don't admit it even to yourself, until you're walking toward the Green Man the following evening, your best jacket buttoned against the wind and the taste of compromise already bitter in your mouth. The pub is warmer than your cottage, thick with pipe smoke and the smell of beer that's been spilled and cleaned and spilled again over decades of fishermen drowning their sorrows in whatever alcohol they could afford. Patrick O'Malley sits in the corner farthest from the fire, nursing a whiskey that probably costs more than you spend on food in a week. He doesn't look up when you enter, but he nods toward the empty chair across from him like he's been expecting you since yesterday. "Thought you might see reason," he says, as you settle into the worn wooden seat. The chair creaks under your weight, and you wonder how many other desperate men have sat here over the years, making bargains with devils they couldn't quite see in the dim lamplight. "Harry, bring our friend a pint of your best bitter." Harry Tregenna draws the beer with more care than usual, foam settling perfect and white. When he sets it before you, his eyes don't quite meet yours, and you realise that half the village probably knows why you're here. In a place like Penven, secrets last about as long as high tide, and everyone understands the difference between the fishermen who've found new sources of income and those still trying to survive on whatever the sea provides. "Simple work, really," O'Malley begins, his voice pitched low enough that it won't carry to the other tables. You take your boat out on nights when the moon's dark, meet a larger vessel in international waters, transfer cargo to your hold, and bring it back to a designated point on the coast. No questions asked, no cargo examined, no unnecessary curiosity about what's in the crates or where it's going next. And if something goes wrong? If the authorities take an interest? Then you don't know anything except that you were hired to move boxes from one boat to another. You don't know what's inside, you don't know who owns it, you don't know where it came from or where it's going. O'Malley takes a sip of his whiskey, savouring it like a man who's learned to appreciate quality. Ignorance is a valuable commodity in this business. The less you know, the less you can tell if someone asks uncomfortable questions. The beer tastes better than anything you've drunk in months, rich and malty with a bite that reminds you what good ale should taste like when it's not watered down to stretch the barrel through another week. You drink slowly, letting the alcohol warm your stomach while you consider the implications of what O'Malley is proposing. £50 seems generous for moving boxes, you say carefully. It's generous because the work requires discretion, reliability, and a certain comfort with risk. Men who possess all three qualities are rarer than you might think. O'Malley signals Harry for another round, though your glass is still half full. The Americans have created an enormous market for quality spirits, and certain government policies have made it difficult to supply that market through conventional channels. We're simply facilitating commerce. It's a pretty way to describe smuggling, you'll give him that. But smuggling is what it is, regardless of how you dress it up in talk of commerce and market forces. Your grandfather smuggled tea and brandy from France when the taxes made honest trade impossible. Your great-grandfather probably moved contraband during the Napoleonic Wars, when blockades and embargoes created opportunities for men willing to risk their necks for a chance at real money. When would this work begin, you ask, and the question commits you more than any formal agreement could. Next week, if the weather holds. There's a cargo of Irish whiskey that needs to reach an American vessel off the Scillies. Quality stuff, aged in proper barrels, the kind of spirits that rich Americans will pay handsomely to obtain. O'Malley leans forward, his pale eyes reflecting the lamplight. Your boat is perfect for the job. Small enough to avoid attention, but large enough to carry a decent cargo. And you know these waters well enough to navigate safely in the dark. How do I know you won't disappear once the cargo is loaded? £50 is a lot of money to trust to strangers. Because this isn't a one-time arrangement. If you prove reliable, there'll be more work, more opportunities to earn that kind of money on a regular basis. O'Malley finishes his whiskey and sets the glass down with the careful precision of a man who's had just enough to drink. And because men in my position don't stay in business long if they develop reputations for cheating their partners. You spend the next hour learning the details, times, locations, signals to exchange with the larger vessel. O'Malley draws rough charts on napkins, showing you the coordinates where you'll meet the cargo ship, the route you'll take back to shore, the hidden cove where local men will be waiting to offload the whiskey and transport it inland. Everything is planned with the kind of precision that suggests this isn't O'Malley's first venture into maritime commerce. When you finally leave the Green Man, the rain has stopped and stars are visible through breaks in the clouds. The air smells clean and salt-sharp, carrying the promise of fair weather for the next few days. You walk home slowly, thinking about the conversation, about the £50 that could solve so many immediate problems, about the line you're preparing to cross. Mary is asleep when you reach the cottage, but her breathing sounds easier tonight, less laboured. You stand in the doorway, watching her chest rise and fall, thinking about doctors' fees and medicine bottles, about the difference between right and wrong when your wife's life might hang in the balance. Tom sits by the dying fire, reading the same magazine he's been studying for days. Found work, you tell him without elaborating. What kind of work? Tom looks up from an article about motor racing at Brooklands, his young face serious in the firelight. The kind that pays well enough to matter. You settle into the chair across from him, feeling older than your 43 years. Might mean being away from the cottage more often, nighttime work. Tom nods like he understands more than you've told him, which he probably does. In a village the size of Penven, everyone knows everyone else's business, and the sudden prosperity of certain families hasn't gone unnoticed by the younger generation. Will it be dangerous? All work on the sea carries risk, but I'll be careful, and it's temporary just until things improve. The lie comes easily, though you both know that things in Penven have been getting worse, not better, for as long as either of you can remember. I could help, Tom offers, and the eagerness in his voice worries you more than you'd like to admit. I know the boat as well as you do, and I'm stronger than most of the men in the village. No. The word comes out harder than you intended. This work, it's not for boys. and I need you here, looking after your mother, keeping the cottage running while I'm away." Tom's face falls, but he doesn't argue. He's old enough to understand that some conversations are finished when they're finished, regardless of how much more he might want to say. You sit together in comfortable silence, listening to the fire settle and the wind rattle the windows, each lost in thoughts about the future and the choices that narrow your options with every passing day. 3 days later, you're loading supplies onto the Mary Catherine under a sky the colour of old pewter. The weather has held fair, with light winds and calm seas that will make the run to the rendezvous point relatively easy. You've told Mary that you're trying a new fishing ground further offshore that might require staying out overnight. She believes you because she wants to believe you, because the alternative means accepting that her husband has chosen to risk everything on something she can't quite bring herself to think about directly. O'Malley meets you at the harbour just after sunset, carrying a canvas bag that clinks softly when he moves. "Signal flags," he explains, "and a bottle of the good stuff for afterward. Consider it a bonus." The bag also contains a pistol, a short-barreled revolver wrapped in oiled cloth. "Just in case," O'Malley adds when he sees your expression, "though if everything goes according to plan, you'll never need to touch it." The weight of the gun in your hands feels heavier than the metal should account for. You've never killed a man, never even pointed a weapon at another human being with serious intent. The closest you came to violence was a pub fight in St. Austell 3 years ago, and that ended with bloody noses and embarrassed apologies rather than anyone seriously hurt. "I've never—" you begin, but O'Malley cuts you off with a wave. "Neither have most of the men doing this work. It's insurance, nothing more. The kind of people who might interfere with our business understand that armed men are treated with more respect than unarmed ones." He helps you store the bag in a waterproof locker near the stern. But remember, if trouble comes, your first priority is getting yourself and your boat home safely. Cargo can be replaced. Good men can't. You cast off just as the last light fades from the western horizon, the Mary Catherine's engine puttering quietly as you navigate the familiar channels leading away from shore. The sea is unusually calm, with swells that barely rock the boat and a light wind that carries the scent of seaweed and distant rain. Navigation lights from larger vessels dot the horizon like fallen stars, cargo ships and fishing trawlers going about their legitimate business while you head toward yours. The coordinates O'Malley provided take you 12 miles southwest of the Scillies, well into international waters where British law theoretically doesn't apply. You run without lights once you're clear of the shipping lanes, relying on compass bearings and dead reckoning to find the rendezvous point. The darkness is complete now, with heavy clouds blocking most of the stars and the moon still hours away from rising. You smell the other vessel before you see her. Coal smoke and hot metal, the distinctive signature of a steam-powered ship running at slow speed. Then her bulk emerges from the darkness like a materialized ghost, a cargo vessel of perhaps 800 tons flying American colors. She shows no lights except a single dim lantern at her stern, barely visible until you're close enough to read the name painted on her transom. Liberty Bell, registered in Boston. A rope ladder drops over her side as you bring the Mary Catherine alongside, and voices call down in accents you recognize as Irish mixed with American urban rough. Men appear at the rail, silhouettes against the slightly lighter sky, and cargo starts coming down even before you've properly secured your boat to the larger vessel. Wooden crates, each one about the size of a coffin but much heavier, lowered on ropes with the practiced efficiency of men who've done this many times before. The Mary Catherine settles deeper in the water with each addition to her hold, riding lower and more sluggishly as her cargo capacity fills. 24 crates in total, each one marked with symbols you don't recognize and don't ask about. "Good luck, mate," calls a voice from above as the last crate is secured and the rope ladder is hauled back up. Smooth seas and following winds. The Liberty Bell's engines rumble to life, and she disappears into the darkness as quickly as she appeared, leaving you alone on a sea that suddenly feels much larger and more dangerous than it did an hour ago. The Mary Catherine handles differently now, responding more slowly to the helm, riding through swells rather than over them. But she's still seaworthy, and the cargo is properly stowed and balanced. The run back to shore takes 3 hours, following a route that keeps you well clear of the main shipping lanes and the patrol areas where customs cutters might be lurking. You navigate by instinct and experience, reading the set of swells and the feel of the wind to maintain your course toward the hidden cove where O'Malley's men are supposed to be waiting. The cove is a narrow cut in the cliffs about 2 miles east of Penven, accessible only at high tide and hidden from casual observation by a screen of rocks that blocks the entrance from seaward view. You fished near here for years, but never entered the cove itself. Tonight you edge the Mary Catherine through the gap between the Guardian rocks, feeling your way forward in near total darkness until you see the dim glow of a shielded lantern on the narrow beach ahead. 3 men wait in the shadows, moving quickly to help you unload as soon as the Mary Catherine's keel touches the shingle. They work in silence, passing the heavy crates from hand to hand up a path that leads to where a motor truck waits with its engine idling softly. Within an hour, your boat is empty again, riding high and light, and one of the men presses an envelope into your hand before melting back into the darkness. You don't open the envelope until you're well clear of the cove and heading home through familiar waters. £50 in £5 notes, more cash than you've held at one time in your adult life. The money feels crisp and clean, smelling faintly of the bank where it was issued, innocent of any knowledge about how it was earned or what laws might have been bent in the earning. By the time you tie up at Penven's harbour, dawn is breaking grey and cold over the Atlantic. A few early fishermen are preparing their boats for the day's work, and they nod to you with the casual friendliness of men who assume you've been out checking nets or trying the fishing grounds near the Seven Stones. No one asks about your cargo or why you've been out all night, because fishermen understand that every man has his own methods and his own secrets. You walk home through streets beginning to stir with morning activity, the envelope of money secure in your jacket pocket. Mary is awake when you enter the cottage, sitting by the window with a cup of tea and a concerned expression. "How did it go?" she asks, and you realise she's not talking about fishing. "Well enough. Better than expected." You pull out 20 of the £50, keeping the rest hidden for now. Enough to see the doctor in St Austell, get you the medicine you need. Mary takes the money with hands that shake slightly, not from illness, but from the knowledge of what this represents. She doesn't ask where it came from or what you had to do to earn it, because she's a fisherman's wife and understands that survival sometimes requires a certain flexibility in one's moral accounting. "Will there be more work like this?" she asks quietly. "Probably, if I want it." You settle into the chair beside her, feeling the exhaustion of a night spent carrying cargo you couldn't identify for people you'd never met. But only when we need it. Only until things get better. It's another lie, though a smaller one this time. You both know that things in Penven aren't going to get better, that the fishing industry is dying, and the old ways of life are disappearing like smoke in an Atlantic gale. What you've done tonight might be the beginning of something that could save your family, or it might be the first step toward a future you can't yet imagine and wouldn't recognise if you could. But for now, it's enough that Mary will see a doctor, that the rent will be paid, that Tom can continue his education, instead of leaving for London to work in some factory where the air will poison his lungs and the wages will barely keep him alive. For now, it's enough that you've found a way to provide for the people you love, regardless of what that way might cost in terms of sleep, peace of mind, or the comfortable certainties of a life lived entirely within the law. The next job comes 2 weeks later, and the one after that, 3 weeks after that. Each time, it gets a little easier to ignore the voice in your head that asks uncomfortable questions about the contents of the crates you're moving and the purposes they'll serve once they reach their destinations. Each time, the money makes it easier to rationalise the risks and the moral compromises. O'Malley introduces you to other men in the business. Billy Tremaine, whose boat you'd seen that first night. Jack Penrose, who owns a 30-foot cutter that can carry twice what the Mary Catherine manages. Even old Jeb Hartwell, whose arthritis hasn't prevented him from finding new sources of income to supplement his pension. All of them fishermen, all of them struggling with the same economic pressures that drove you to accept O'Malley's first offer. The cargo varies from run to run. Sometimes it's Irish whiskey bound for American speakeasies, sometimes Scottish gin or French brandy. Occasionally there are smaller, heavier crates that O'Malley describes as specialty items without providing further details. You learn not to ask questions about these mystery shipments, just as you learn not to think too hard about the ultimate destinations of the alcohol you're moving. But it's not just liquor crossing these dark waters. One night in late autumn, you transfer a cargo that clanks metallically when the crates are moved. Heavy boxes that require 2 men to lift and make the Mary Catherine ride dangerously low in unusually rough seas. When one crate splits open during the transfer, you catch a glimpse of rifles packed in grease-soaked cloth, military weapons that definitely aren't destined for American bars and private parties. Sporting goods, O'Malley explains when you ask, but his pale eyes don't quite meet yours. There's a thriving market in America for quality hunting equipment, especially items that are difficult to obtain through normal commercial channels. Why? It's another comfortable lie, and you accept it because the alternative is acknowledging that you're now moving weapons as well as whiskey, that the money keeping your family fed and housed might be coming from arms that will kill people in wars you know nothing about. The rifles disappear into the same truck that usually carries the whiskey, driven by the same silent men who never give their names or acknowledge your existence beyond the practical necessities of loading and payment. Tom has stopped asking direct questions about your nighttime absences, but he's begun studying the Mary Catherine with the calculating eye of someone who understands boats and has noticed changes in her equipment and maintenance. New ropes, a compass that's actually accurate, spare parts for the engine that you couldn't have afforded on fishing income alone. He's smart enough to connect these improvements to your mysterious employment, and you worry that he's also smart enough to want a piece of that employment for himself. The worry becomes reality on a November night when rough weather forces you to postpone a scheduled run. You're sitting in the cottage, listening to wind howl around the chimney and rain hammer the windows, when Tom announces that he's been talking to some of the other young men in the village. Billy Tremaine says there's good money to be made by men who aren't afraid of hard work and don't ask too many questions, Tom says, his voice carefully casual in the way that means he's been planning this conversation for days. Says a strong back and knowledge of boats is all a man really needs. Billy Tremaine talks too much, you reply, but you can hear the weakness in your own voice. Tom is 16, old enough to work, old enough to understand that his family's improved circumstances didn't come from fishing, old enough to want his share of whatever opportunities are available. I could help, Tom continues, pressing his advantage. I know the boat as well as you do, and I'm not afraid of night work. We could take larger cargoes, make more money, maybe even buy a bigger boat that could handle the really profitable runs. The eagerness in his voice terrifies you more than any customs cutter or rival smuggling gang ever could. This is how it happens, you realise, not through dramatic confrontations or criminal masterminds, but through ordinary people making rational economic decisions in impossible circumstances. Tom isn't being corrupted by evil influences, he's being corrupted by simple arithmetic, by the understanding that illegal work pays better than legal work when legal work doesn't pay enough to live on. No, you say firmly, this work, it's temporary, just until fishing improves, until we can get back to normal life. Normal life? Tom's laugh has an edge that makes him sound older than his years. When was life in Penven ever normal? When did fishing ever provide enough to keep families comfortable? This is the first time I can remember when we've had enough food, enough coal, enough of anything. He's right, of course, and you both know it. The money from O'Malley's jobs has transformed your family's daily existence, eliminating the constant background anxiety about rent and food and medical bills that used to dominate every conversation. Mary has seen the doctor in St. Austell, gotten medicine that's actually helping her cough. The cottage is warm, the larder is full, and for the first time in years, you're not afraid of unexpected expenses. But success brings its own problems. Other families in Penven have noticed your improved circumstances, and some have begun asking pointed questions about your new sources of income. Harry Tregenna at the pub makes comments about men who've found ways to supplement their fishing that don't involve catching fish. Mrs. Kellaway from the shop mentions casually that certain boats seem to be doing well, despite the general scarcity of fish in local waters. The scrutiny makes you uncomfortable, not because you're afraid of legal consequences, but because you're beginning to realise that the smuggling trade is creating divisions within the village community. There are now two classes of fishermen in Penven, those who've accepted work from O'Malley's organisation and those who haven't, those who have money and those who don't, those who can afford new equipment and those still struggling with gear held together by wire and prayer. Worse, the success of the smuggling operation is attracting attention from outside the village. Strange faces appear in the Green Man, men with London accents who ask casual questions about boat owners and cargo capacity. Cars with unfamiliar licence plates drive through Penven more frequently, stopping to observe the harbour and take note of which boats seem most active during the hours when legitimate fishing doesn't typically occur. O'Malley dismisses your concerns when you mention them during one of your regular meetings. Competition is natural in any thriving business, he says, sipping his usual whiskey. But our organisation has advantages that newcomers can't easily replicate. Established relationships, reliable supply chains, local knowledge that takes years to develop. What if these newcomers aren't interested in competing? What if they're more interested in taking over? Then they'll discover that Cornwall fishermen aren't as easy to intimidate as they might expect. O'Malley's smile doesn't reach his eyes. Besides, territorial disputes are bad for business. Rational men prefer to negotiate mutually beneficial arrangements rather than engage in expensive conflicts. And it's another comfortable theory, like the ones about sporting goods and commercial facilitation, and you want to believe it because the alternative is acknowledging that you've wandered into something much more dangerous than you originally understood. But the evidence is mounting that O'Malley's confidence might be misplaced, that the quiet waters around Cornwall are becoming less quiet and more contested with each passing week. The first real sign of trouble comes on a December night, when the fog rolls in thick as wool, reducing visibility to barely 10 feet in any direction. You're returning from what should have been a routine run, the Mary Catherine riding light, after transferring 30 cases of Irish whiskey to an American vessel off the Scillies, when you hear engines approaching from the southeast. not one engine, but several, running fast and close together in a way that suggests coordination rather than coincidence. You cut your own engine and drift, listening to the sound of the approaching boats as they sweep through the area where you conducted your business an hour earlier. Searchlights begin probing through the fog, powerful beams that turn the mist into a shifting wall of white and grey. But these aren't the steady, methodical sweeps of customs cutters looking for smugglers. These lights move with predatory purpose, hunting for something specific. The first burst of gunfire shatters the night like breaking glass, muzzle flashes strobing orange through the fog. Automatic weapons firing in controlled bursts that speak of military training and serious intent. Then voices shouting in accents you can't identify over the noise of engines and gunfire. More shooting, this time from multiple directions, suggesting that at least two groups of boats are engaged in active combat barely half a mile from where you're drifting. You start the Mary Catherine's engine and head for shore as quietly as possible, running without lights and praying that the fog will hide you from whatever's happening in the waters behind you. The shooting continues for another 10 minutes, punctuated by the occasional explosion that lights up the fog like lightning. Then silence, broken only by the sound of a single engine heading away to the north at high speed. By morning, pieces of wreckage wash up on beaches throughout the area. Planking from what might have been a fishing boat, life preservers marked with names you don't recognise, and a canvas bag containing waterlogged documents written in what looks like Irish Gaelic. The Customs Service launches an investigation, but their official reports mention only suspicious debris and possible maritime accident. No bodies are recovered, no boats are reported missing, and by the end of the week, the incident has disappeared from local newspapers. O'Malley's explanation, when you finally manage to corner him at the Green Man, is characteristically vague. A misunderstanding between business associates, he says, stirring sugar into his coffee with the careful precision of a man who's had to think quickly about uncomfortable questions. The kind of disagreement that occasionally arises when territories overlap and communication breaks down. Someone died out there, you point out. Probably several someones, given the amount of shooting. Men in this business understand the risks. They accept those risks in exchange for the rewards. O'Malley meets your eyes directly, and for the first time since you've known him, you see something that might be genuine concern. But you're right to be worried. The situation is becoming more complicated than we initially anticipated. What kind of complications? London complications. Men with more money and fewer scruples than our current organisation possesses. O'Malley finishes his coffee and signals Harry for another. They've decided that Cornwall represents an untapped opportunity, that local arrangements aren't being managed with sufficient efficiency or ambition. The euphemisms don't hide the reality. Someone with serious resources and violent intentions wants to take over the smuggling trade that's been providing income for half the fishermen in Pen Ven. Someone who's willing to sink boats and kill crews to make their point about new management policies. Are we safe? You ask, though you already know the answer from the expression on O'Malley's face. For now, our London friends are still in the assessment phase, determining which local assets are worth preserving and which represent obstacles to efficient operations. O'Malley lights a cigarette with hands that shake slightly, the first sign of nerves you've ever seen him display. But that assessment period won't last indefinitely. Eventually they'll want definitive answers about cooperation and loyalty. You return home that evening with more questions than answers, and the uncomfortable realization that your family's improved circumstances might be temporary. Worse, backing out of the smuggling trade might not be an option anymore. Men who've seen your face, know your boat, and understand your capabilities aren't likely to let you simply return to fishing and pretend that none of this ever happened. Mary notices your mood immediately, the way wives do when their husbands bring worry home like salt spray on their clothes. She doesn't ask direct questions, but she watches you more carefully over the next few days, noting the way you check the locks on the cottage doors before bed and position yourself where you can see the harbour from the kitchen window. Tom, meanwhile, becomes more insistent about joining what he still sees as a profitable business opportunity rather than an increasingly dangerous trap. His 16th birthday has passed, making him officially old enough to work, and he's begun pointing out that other young men in the village are finding employment with the mysterious night fishermen who somehow always return with full holds despite the general scarcity of fish. Jackie Penrose is barely a year older than me, and his father lets him crew on the big runs, Tom argues over dinner one evening. Says he can make more in one night than most men earn in a month at legitimate work. Jackie Penrose is an idiot, and his father is an idiot for putting him at risk, you reply, but the argument lacks conviction. Jackie Penrose is actually quite bright, and his father is one of the most experienced fishermen on this stretch of coast. If experienced men are bringing their sons into the business, it suggests either that the money is too good to pass up, or that the risks of staying out are becoming greater than the risks of getting involved. The decision is taken out of your hands 3 days before Christmas, when Billy Tremaine doesn't return from what should have been a routine run to pick up a cargo of French brandy. His boat, the Sarah's Dream, is found drifting empty 12 miles southwest of the Scillies, her engine still running and her hold filled with seawater. No distress signal, no wreckage, no sign of violence. Billy has simply vanished as completely as if the sea had opened and swallowed him whole. The official investigation concludes that Billy fell overboard during rough weather and drowned, a tragic but not uncommon fate for fishermen working alone in winter conditions. But everyone in Penvan knows that Billy was one of the most careful seamen on the coast, that he never worked alone on smuggling runs, and that the weather on the night he disappeared was calm and clear. O'Malley's explanation is darker than his usual diplomatic evasions. Billy was offered an opportunity to transfer his allegiance to our London competitors, he tells you during an emergency meeting in the back room of the Green Man. He declined their generous offer, apparently with insufficient tact and diplomacy. They killed him? The words taste like ashes in your mouth. They removed an obstacle to efficient business operations. Billy chose to be an obstacle rather than an asset. O'Malley's pale eyes are harder than you've ever seen them. The same choice will be presented to every man currently working these waters. Our new partners are conducting individual interviews to determine who can be trusted with expanded responsibilities and who represents a liability to future operations. When will they want to interview me? Soon, probably within the week. O'Malley pulls out his cigarette case, then thinks better of it and puts it away. You should know that they've been asking specific questions about family situations, financial pressures, potential leverage points that might ensure cooperation. They're thorough in their personnel assessments. The threat is clear without being explicit. Your wife, your son, your cottage, everything that matters to you is now part of the equation that these London men are calculating. Cooperation means continued employment under new management. Resistance means following Billy Tremaine into whatever dark water claimed him. You spend a sleepless night staring at the ceiling, listening to Mary's improved breathing and Tom's quiet snoring, trying to figure out how to protect your family from consequences that stem from decisions you made with the best of intentions. The money that was supposed to save them might now be the reason they're in danger. Christmas Day brings no relief, only the hollow mockery of trying to celebrate while knowing that violence is approaching like a winter storm you can see building on the horizon. You give Mary a new shawl bought with smuggling money, Tom a set of tools that might help him find legitimate work as a mechanic or carpenter. They give you a pipe carved from driftwood and a book of poetry about the sea, gifts that remind you of who you used to be before you started moving mysterious crates through dark waters. The interview comes on December 28th in the form of two men in expensive coats who arrive in a Bentley that looks absurdly out of place on Penven's narrow streets. They don't need to introduce themselves or explain their business. Everyone in the village knows why London men in expensive cars visit Cornish fishing villages in the dead of winter. Ray Kelly, the older of the two, has the kind of face that suggests he's comfortable with violence and good at applying it efficiently. His companion, who never gives his name, watches everything with pale eyes that catalogue details the way a tax assessor evaluates property. They want to meet at the harbour, on neutral ground where their conversation won't be overheard by curious neighbours. Understand you've been doing some freelance maritime work, Kelly begins, his London accent sharp enough to cut glass. Moving cargo for Irish interests, developing expertise in night navigation and discreet cargo handling. Some, you admit, because denying it would be both pointless and potentially fatal. Good. Shows initiative, entrepreneurial spirit, exactly the kind of qualities we value in local partners. Kelly produces a silver cigarette case and offers you one. The tobacco is Turkish, expensive, the same kind O'Malley smokes. We're looking to expand operations in this area, bring in more cargo, improve efficiency, increase profitability for everyone involved. What would that mean for the current arrangements? Current arrangements were small scale, inefficient, limited by lack of proper organisation and inadequate capital investment. Kelly's companion speaks for the first time, his voice carrying the kind of educated accent that suggests Oxford or Cambridge. We represent interests capable of providing both organisation and capital in exchange for exclusive operational control and reasonable profit participation. The negotiation, if it can be called that, continues for half an hour. You learn that the London organisation wants to triple the volume of cargo moving through Cornish waters, that they have contacts in America willing to pay premium prices for quality merchandise, that they view the current Irish-dominated operation as a quaint but ultimately inadequate business model. You also learn that cooperation is not optional. Men who choose to work with the new organisation will be well compensated and professionally protected. Men who choose otherwise will find that their options in Cornwall become severely limited, as Billy Tremaine discovered. We'll need an answer within 48 hours, Kelly concludes, dropping his cigarette and grinding it under his heel. After that, we'll assume that silence indicates a preference for the status quo, which would be unfortunate for all parties concerned. They drive away without shaking hands or exchanging pleasantries, leaving you standing on the harbour wall with the taste of expensive tobacco in your mouth and the knowledge that your family's safety now depends on a decision you're not qualified to make. Cooperate with men who killed Billy Tremaine, or refuse and face consequences you can't predict but don't want to contemplate. That evening, you sit Tom down for the conversation you've been dreading since this whole business began. You tell him everything: the smuggling, the money, the territorial war that's developed around what used to be a simple arrangement between fishermen and entrepreneurs. You tell him about Billy Tremaine and the London men and the choice you've been given. Tom listens without interruption, his young face growing more serious with each detail. When you finish, he's quiet for a long time, staring into the fire with the expression of someone who's suddenly realised that childhood has ended without warning. "What are you going to do?" he finally asks. "I don't know. Cooperate, and we become part of something bigger and more dangerous than what we're doing now. Refuse, and..." You shrug, because some possibilities are too dark to speak aloud. Could we leave? Go to London or Canada? Start over somewhere else? With what money? And men like Kelly don't forget about people who've seen their operations, who know their methods. You lean back in your chair, feeling every one of your 43 years. Besides, this is our home. Your mother was born in this cottage, as was her mother before her. We don't run away from Cornwall because London gangsters think they own the sea. Tom nods slowly, understanding something fundamental about pride and place and the difference between tactical retreat and cowardice. Then we cooperate? We cooperate, but carefully, quietly, looking for opportunities to minimize the risks and maximize our chances of surviving whatever comes next. You meet his eyes directly, and you stay out of it completely. This is my mistake, my responsibility. I won't have you paying for decisions I made before you were old enough to understand the consequences. I'm old enough now, Tom points out, but he doesn't press the argument. He's smart enough to understand that some battles are worth fighting, and others are just ways of getting yourself killed for no purpose. The next morning brings news that makes your decision both easier and more terrifying. Jack Penrose's boat was found burned to the waterline in a cove near St Ives, with no sign of Jack or his son Jackie. The official investigation will probably conclude that an engine fire got out of control, but everyone in the smuggling trade knows better. The London men are eliminating potential opposition with systematic efficiency, removing anyone who might complicate their takeover of Cornish waters. You find O'Malley at the Green Man, drinking whiskey at 10 in the morning and looking older than you've ever seen him. His usually perfect appearance is dishevelled, his pale eyes bloodshot and haunted. They want an answer, you tell him. Give them the right one, O'Malley replies without looking up from his glass. Because the wrong one means joining Billy and Jack wherever they've gone and taking your family with you. What about you? What answer are you giving them? I'm Irish. They don't trust the Irish, think we're all Republicans and revolutionaries. O'Malley finishes his whiskey and signals Harry for another. My answer was given for me when they burned Jack's boat. They're cleaning house, eliminating the old management, installing their own people in positions of authority. So you're leaving? I'm adapting, finding new opportunities in other locations, working with different organisations that value experience and local knowledge. O'Malley finally meets your eyes. You should consider doing the same. These London men, they're not interested in partnerships or local arrangements. They want employees, not colleagues. But you can't leave, and O'Malley knows it. You have roots here that go deeper than fear, obligations that matter more than money. Mary is finally healthy, Tom is finally getting an education, and the cottage that sheltered your family for 3 generations isn't something you can abandon because strangers have decided to reorganise the local criminal economy. That afternoon, you walk to the harbour and wait for Kelly's return. When the Bentley arrives, you're ready with your answer. You'll work with the new organisation, move their cargo, follow their instructions, and keep your mouth shut about anything you see or hear. In return, they'll leave your family alone and pay you enough to maintain the standard of living that smuggling has made possible. Kelly seems satisfied with your cooperation, though he makes it clear that the terms of employment have changed significantly. Larger cargoes, tighter schedules, more dangerous runs that will take you further from shore and deeper into waters where the customs service can't easily follow. The pay is better, but so are the risks. One more thing, Kelly adds as he prepares to leave. We'll need someone to help coordinate local operations, someone who knows the fishermen and can identify reliable workers. Interested in expanded responsibilities? The offer is both a promotion and a trap. Accept, and you become part of the management structure. complicit in decisions about who lives and dies. Refuse, and you mark yourself as someone who can't be trusted with sensitive information. "I'll think about it," you say, though you both know that thinking time is a luxury you can't afford. Kelly nods and drives away, leaving you alone on the harbour wall with the knowledge that your family's survival now depends on your ability to navigate an increasingly complex and deadly business. The simple days of moving whiskey for Irish entrepreneurs are over. What comes next will test not just your seamanship and courage, but your willingness to compromise with forces that measure success in profit margins and acceptable casualty rates. That night, you tell Mary that you found steady work with a shipping company, that the pay is good, but the hours irregular. She accepts the explanation because she needs to believe it, because the alternative is acknowledging that her husband has become something she might not recognize. Tom asks no questions, but you see him watching the harbour more carefully, noting which boats come and go during the hours when legitimate fishermen are home with their families. The new regime begins the following week, and immediately you understand that Kelly wasn't exaggerating about expanded operations. Instead of 20 or 30 cases of liquor, you're now moving loads that require every inch of available space in the Mary Catherine's hold. Instead of meeting single vessels in international waters, you're part of a coordinated fleet that transfers cargo between multiple ships in operations that resemble military maneuvers more than simple smuggling runs. The money is correspondingly better, enough to transform your family from comfortable to genuinely prosperous by Penven standards. But prosperity comes with a cost that goes beyond the obvious risks of capture or drowning. You're now moving cargo that definitely isn't just alcohol, participating in operations that serve purposes you're not allowed to understand, working for men who view human life as an acceptable business expense. The first shipment of weapons comes in February during a storm that keeps legitimate fishing boats in harbour but provides perfect cover for less legitimate maritime activities. Crates marked with symbols you don't recognise, heavy enough to require block and tackle to transfer from the supply ship to your hold. When one splits open during the loading process, you catch a glimpse of rifles packed in cosmoline, but also something that looks like small artillery shells and coils of wire that might be detonating cord. "Sporting goods for the American market," Kelly explains when you mention the incident during your monthly briefing. "Hunting equipment, target shooting supplies, the kind of specialized merchandise that enthusiasts will pay premium prices to obtain." It's the same comfortable lie O'Malley used to tell, but Kelly delivers it with the flat certainty of a man who doesn't care whether you believe him or not. The fiction serves a purpose, allowing you to maintain plausible deniability if questions are ever asked, but it's not meant to convince anyone of anything except the futility of asking those questions in the first place. The American ship that receives the cargo flies no flag and shows no identification numbers, her crew speaking accented English that might be Irish, German, or something else entirely. They work with military efficiency, moving the weapons crates into hidden compartments that suggest this vessel was designed specifically for smuggling rather than converted from legitimate merchant service. When you ask where the ship is bound, one of the crew members just laughs and tells you that curiosity killed more than cats in this business. You return to Penven with a hold full of American whiskey, premium brands that will find eager buyers in London's better clubs and restaurants. The transaction seems balanced, weapons out, liquor in, but you're beginning to understand that you're part of a much larger operation that trades in anything profitable, regardless of legal or moral considerations. Tom has noticed the changes in the village's social dynamics, the way certain families now have money, while others struggle with the same poverty that's always characterised life in Cornwall. He's also noticed that some of the young men who used to talk about leaving for London or Liverpool have suddenly found reasons to stay. taking jobs that don't involve fishing but somehow require intimate knowledge of boats and tides. Jackie Penrose was asking about the Mary Catherine, Tom mentions one evening as you're cleaning your nets. Wanted to know if she could carry larger loads, if her engine was powerful enough for long-distance work. Jackie Penrose, whose father's boat was burned with him inside it barely 2 months ago. Jackie, who's now working for Kelly's organisation and recruiting other young men to join what's being described as a maritime transportation cooperative. The irony isn't lost on you. The London gangsters have eliminated Jackie's father, but kept Jackie himself as a useful local asset. What did you tell him? That he should ask you directly if he wanted information about our boat. Tom's voice carries an edge that reminds you he's no longer a child, that he understands exactly what kind of work has been paying for his education and his mother's medicine. But I think he's planning to ask you for a job. The prediction proves accurate 3 days later, when Jackie approaches you at the harbour with a proposition that's clearly been rehearsed. Kelly's organisation needs experienced crew members for larger vessels, men who know these waters and can handle themselves in difficult situations. The pay is excellent, the work irregular but steady, and there are opportunities for advancement within the organisation for men who prove reliable. I know what happened to your father, you tell Jackie quietly. The same men who killed him are now offering you employment. Doesn't that seem like something you should think about very carefully? My father was stubborn, Jackie replies, his young face harder than it should be at 18. He thought he could resist change, maintain old arrangements that weren't profitable enough to survive. I'm more adaptable. It's a chilling assessment, delivered with the casual pragmatism of someone who's learned to view his father's murder as a business decision rather than a personal tragedy. Jackie has accepted employment with his father's killers because the alternative is poverty, and he's rationalised that acceptance by blaming his father for insufficient flexibility in adapting to new market conditions. You decline Jackie's offer to recruit you for expanded duties, claiming that the Mary Catherine is too small for the kind of work Kelly's organisation has in mind. It's partially true. Your boat can't compete with the 40 and 50-foot vessels that are now handling the bulk of the smuggling traffic. But mainly, it's a way of avoiding deeper involvement in operations that increasingly resemble military campaigns rather than simple contraband runs. But avoiding deeper involvement doesn't mean avoiding involvement entirely. Your monthly meetings with Kelly have evolved into briefings about operational security, territorial boundaries, and the importance of maintaining absolute discretion about cargo manifests and delivery schedules. You learn that the organisation is moving more than just alcohol and weapons, that certain shipments contain items that Kelly describes as diplomatic materials, without providing further explanation. You also learn that the territorial war that eliminated O'Malley's Irish operation wasn't the end of the conflict, but merely the first phase. Other groups, some from London, some from Bristol, one rumoured to be connected to German interests, are testing Kelly's control of Cornish waters. The burning of fishing boats and the disappearance of their crews are becoming regular occurrences along this stretch of coast, though official investigations never seem to uncover evidence of criminal activity. The violence escalates in March when a customs cutter intercepts one of Kelly's supply ships in what should have been safe waters well beyond the 12-mile limit. Instead of submitting to inspection, the smuggling vessel opens fire with weapons that definitely weren't designed for hunting or target shooting. The gun battle lasts 20 minutes and ends with the customs cutter limping back to port with 3 dead officers and damage that will take months to repair. The incident makes headlines in the London papers, described as an unprovoked attack on His Majesty's revenue officers by unknown criminals using military-grade weapons. Parliamentary questions are asked about the adequacy of customs enforcement and the need for stronger measures against organised smuggling. But in Penven, the main effect is to remind everyone that the stakes have risen far beyond anything that could be described as casual law-breaking. Kelly's response to the increased official attention is to expand operations rather than reduce them, moving larger cargoes more frequently and using more heavily armed vessels to ensure that future encounters with government forces end differently. The fishing boats that serve as local distribution networks are equipped with hidden compartments and emergency procedures for jettisoning cargo if interception seems likely. You're given a new radio, military surplus equipment that allows communication with other boats in the smuggling fleet and with coordination centres on shore. The radio comes with specific frequencies to monitor and code words to use if official interference threatens operational security. You're also given a better pistol, a .38 caliber revolver that Kelly describes as more suitable for professional use than that antique you've been carrying. The weight of the new gun reminds you daily that your work has moved far beyond the simple cargo transfers that O'Malley originally proposed. You're now part of an armed organisation engaged in open warfare with government forces, carrying weapons that are meant to kill rather than intimidate, participating in operations that could easily result in your death or imprisonment if anything goes wrong. Mary has stopped asking questions about your nighttime absences, but she's begun checking the locks on the cottage doors and windows before bed. She's also started attending church more regularly, praying with the intensity of someone who understands that her family's prosperity might be temporary and their safety is definitely not guaranteed. Tom, meanwhile, has begun studying nautical charts with the focused attention of someone preparing for a specific kind of work. He asks careful questions about navigation techniques, engine maintenance, and the legal boundaries of territorial waters. When you catch him practicing knots that are more commonly used for securing cargo than handling fishing nets, you realise that your attempts to keep him out of the smuggling trade may have been less successful than you hoped. The conversation you've been dreading finally happens on a night in early April, when Tom announces that he's been offered a position with Kelly's organisation. Not as crew on your boat, but as part of the land-based operation that coordinates deliveries and manages the distribution network throughout Cornwall. "It's good work," Tom says, his voice carrying the defensive tone of someone who's already made his decision but wants parental approval anyway. "Office work mostly, keeping track of schedules and inventory, making sure the right cargo gets to the right places at the right times. Office work that involves criminals and contraband and men who kill people for business reasons," you point out. "Office work that pays better than anything else available to young men in Cornwall," Tom counters. "Office work that uses my education, that has opportunities for advancement, that doesn't require me to spend my life hauling nets in seas that don't have fish anymore." The argument that follows is bitter and painful, touching on everything you've tried to protect Tom from and everything he's determined to embrace despite those protections. He points out that your own involvement in smuggling has funded his education and his mother's medical care, that refusing Kelly's offer would be hypocritical given the family's dependence on criminal income. You point out that desk work for criminal organisations has a way of evolving into field work, that young men who start as clerks often end up as enforcers, that the London gangsters who've taken over Cornwall's smuggling trade don't maintain clear distinctions between administrative and operational personnel. In the end, Tom accepts the position because he's 18 and ambitious, and believes that he can navigate the dangers more skillfully than the older men who've been eliminated for insufficient cooperation. You don't forbid it because you understand that parental authority has limits when dealing with legal adults who've seen their fathers compromising with the same forces they're now being asked to join. But you do extract a promise that Tom will stay out of the maritime side of the operation, that he'll limit his involvement to the paperwork and scheduling that theoretically carries lower risks than actually moving contraband through contested waters. It's a fragile compromise that satisfies no one, but allows both of you to pretend that distinctions still matter in a business where boundaries shift as quickly as the tides. Tom starts his new job the following Monday, working from an office above a ship chandler's shop in St. Austell. His duties, as described to Mary, involve coordinating supply deliveries for commercial fishing vessels throughout the region. It's close enough to the truth to be believable, and far enough from the truth to let Mary maintain the illusion that her son's employment is fundamentally legitimate. But you know better, and Tom knows that you know better. When he comes home each evening with stories about inventory management and delivery schedules, you both understand that he's talking about weapons and drugs and contraband liquor, about shipments that serve purposes neither of you is supposed to understand. The arrangement works for exactly 6 weeks, until the night when Tom doesn't come home at all. You wait until midnight, then until 2 in the morning, before accepting that something has gone wrong. Tom has never stayed out all night without warning, never failed to send word if his work was keeping him later than expected. When dawn breaks grey and cold over the Atlantic, you know with the certainty of long experience that your son is in serious trouble. The office above the ship chandler's shop is empty when you arrive in St. Austell, the door hanging open and papers scattered across the floor as if someone left in considerable haste. The chandler claims ignorance about the office's previous occupants, but his nervousness suggests that he knows exactly who was working upstairs and what happened to them. Kelly is nowhere to be found when you check his usual haunts in Penven and the surrounding villages. The Green Man's barkeeper claims he hasn't seen any London men for several days, but the fear in his eyes suggests that he's been given specific instructions about what to say to anyone asking uncomfortable questions. It takes 3 days of increasingly desperate searching before you find someone willing to talk, and then only because old Jeb Hartwell is dying of consumption and no longer cares about the consequences of speaking truth to people who prefer comfortable lies. Your boy was in the wrong place when the Bristol men came calling, Jeb tells you, his voice barely audible above the sound of his laboured breathing. They wanted information about Kelly's supply routes, about which boats were carrying what cargo and when. Tom tried to protect the records, said he was just a clerk who didn't know anything important. What happened to him? They took him along when they left, figured he might be useful for negotiating with Kelly or for getting information about operational details. Jeb coughs wetly into a handkerchief that comes away bloody. That was 4 days ago. Haven't heard anything since. The knowledge that Tom has been kidnapped by a rival criminal organisation provides both relief and terror. Relief because it means he's probably still alive, at least for now. Terror because it means his continued survival depends on negotiations between groups of men who measure human value in terms of strategic advantage and acceptable losses. You spend the next week trying to contact Kelly through intermediaries, sending messages through the network of fishermen and shopkeepers who facilitate the smuggling trade's daily operations. Most of your contacts claim ignorance about Kelly's current whereabouts, but a few admit that the London organisation is reassessing its Cornwall operations in light of increased competition and official attention. The reassessment, you eventually learn, involves pulling back from the most exposed positions and consolidating around core assets that can be defended more effectively. Tom, as a relatively junior employee with limited operational knowledge, doesn't qualify as a core asset worth significant resources to recover. The realization that your son has been abandoned by the organisation he worked for fills you with rage that burns hotter than anything you felt since Mary's illness first forced you to consider smuggling as a source of income. Tom's loyalty to Kelly's operation counted for nothing when tested against business calculations about cost-effectiveness and acceptable losses. But rage won't free your son from wherever the Bristol men are holding him, and the police can't help with a kidnapping that officially never happened involving people who officially don't exist. If Tom is to be saved, it will have to be through methods that don't involve legal authorities or official assistance. You spend 2 more days learning everything you can about the Bristol operation, their boats, their routes, their personnel, their weaknesses. The information comes from fishermen who've worked for multiple organisations, from pub conversations overheard by men who've learned to listen carefully when criminals think they're speaking privately, from Jackie Penrose, who's decided that his loyalty to Kelly doesn't extend to accepting the loss of his childhood friend without making some effort at rescue. What you learn isn't encouraging. The Bristol men are professionals, experienced in maritime crime, and comfortable with violence as a business tool. They're holding Tom and several other kidnapped assets at a fortified position on Lundy Island, 20 miles offshore, in waters that make rescue extremely difficult for anyone not familiar with the local currents and weather patterns. But you are familiar with those waters, have fished near Lundy since you were younger than Tom is now, and you know other men who share that familiarity, fishermen who've been forced into the smuggling trade by the same economic pressures that shaped your own choices, men who understand that Tom's kidnapping represents a threat to every family that's become dependent on criminal income for survival. The rescue mission takes shape slowly, carefully, with the kind of planning that reflects both desperation and professional competence. 6 boats, 12 men, weapons obtained from sources that don't ask questions about intended use. The plan is simple. Approach Lundy during the new moon, land a small force to locate and free the prisoners, evacuate everyone before the Bristol men can mount an effective response. It's the kind of operation that could easily result in multiple deaths and certainly will result in escalated warfare between criminal organisations. But Tom is your son, and some obligations matter more than calculations about acceptable risk or probable consequences. The night of the rescue is moonless and cold, with swells that make navigation challenging and visibility that drops to 0 whenever fog banks roll in from the southwest. You run the Mary Catherine without lights, following compass bearings and relying on your knowledge of local waters to avoid the rocks that have claimed ships for centuries around Lundy's treacherous shores. The other boats in your improvised fleet maintain radio silence, communicating only through prearranged light signals that could be mistaken for navigation markers by casual observers. Jackie Penrose commands the largest vessel, a 40-foot fishing boat borrowed from a sympathetic owner who understands that Tom's kidnapping threatens the safety of every family involved in the smuggling trade. The remaining boats carry men armed with shotguns, pistols, and the kind of grim determination that comes from protecting one's own against outside threats. You reach Lundy's sheltered eastern anchorage just after midnight, finding the Bristol organisation's boats exactly where intelligence suggested they would be. 3 fast motor launches and a converted trawler that serves as their floating headquarters. Lights burn in the windows of the abandoned lighthouse that the Bristol men have converted into their island stronghold, and armed sentries patrol the narrow beach where prisoners could be held in the old quarry buildings. The assault begins with Jackie's boat ramming the largest Bristol launch, holing her below the waterline and preventing any possibility of the kidnappers escaping by sea. Gunfire erupts immediately, muzzle flashes strobing orange in the darkness as both sides open up with everything they have. The sound echoes off Lundy's granite cliffs like thunder, magnified and distorted until it becomes impossible to tell how many weapons are firing or from which directions. You beach the Mary Catherine on the rocky shore and lead 2 other men up the steep path toward the lighthouse, moving by feel through darkness broken only by the occasional tracer round or burning debris from the sea battle below. The Bristol sentries are focused on the threat from the water, giving your small force the advantage of surprise as you approach their positions from the landward side. The first guard goes down without raising an alarm, clubbed unconscious by a fisherman's mallet before he can shout a warning. The second manages a single shot before Jackie's shotgun cuts him down, the blast echoing through the abandoned buildings like the voice of judgment itself. After that, stealth becomes impossible, and the assault turns into a running gun battle through the maze of ruined walls and collapsed buildings that litter Lundy's Plateau. You find Tom and 3 other prisoners locked in the basement of the old lighthouse keeper's cottage, chained to iron rings that were probably installed by previous generations of criminals who used Lundy as a base for their operations. Tom is conscious but clearly beaten, his left eye swollen shut and dried blood crusting his lip. When he sees you, relief floods his battered face. "Knew you'd come," he whispers as you work to break the chains with bolt cutters borrowed from the Mary Catherine's toolkit. "Told them my father wouldn't abandon family no matter what it cost." Getting the prisoners back to the boats proves more difficult than reaching them. The Bristol men have realised that their stronghold has been breached and are fighting desperately to prevent their captives from escaping. Automatic weapons fire rakes the path down to the beach, forcing you to take cover behind whatever shelter the rocky landscape provides, while Jackie's men return fire from positions among the ruined quarry buildings. One of the rescued prisoners, a young fisherman from Mousehole, whose crime was refusing to transport Bristol cargo, takes a bullet in the shoulder as you're helping him toward the boats. Another, an older man who worked for Kelly's organisation until the territorial war eliminated his usefulness, collapses from exhaustion and injuries inflicted during his captivity. You and Tom carry him between you, staggering through gunfire toward the dubious safety of the landing beach. The Mary Catherine's engine starts on the first pull, bless her reliable heart, and you reverse off the beach just as Bristol reinforcements arrive from the lighthouse. Bullets whine overhead and splash into the water around your stern, but the darkness and confusion work in your favour. Within minutes, you're beyond effective range of small arms fire, heading into open water with Tom safe in your boat and the knowledge that you've struck a significant blow against the organisation that threatened your family. But success comes with a price that becomes clear over the following days. The Bristol organisation retaliates by targeting fishing boats throughout Cornwall, burning vessels, and eliminating crew members suspected of participating in the Lundy rescue. The violence spreads beyond the criminal organisations to affect innocent fishermen who had no involvement in smuggling but happened to be in the wrong waters at the wrong time. Kelly's organisation, meanwhile, interprets your independent action as a challenge to their authority over local operations. You may have rescued Tom, but you've also demonstrated that Cornwall fishermen can organise effective military operations without London oversight or permission. That kind of independence threatens the hierarchical structure that Kelly's bosses consider essential for maintaining control over their territorial expansion. The warning comes through Jackie Penrose, delivered with the apologetic tone of someone who doesn't like the message he's been asked to carry. Kelly wants to meet with you personally to discuss your future role in the organisation's Cornwall operations. The meeting is described as an opportunity to clarify misunderstandings and establish mutually beneficial arrangements for continued cooperation. "He's going to kill you," Tom says flatly when you tell him about Kelly's invitation. "Or try to kill you. Men like Kelly don't forgive unauthorised operations, even successful ones that serve their interests. Maybe, but not attending the meeting would be worse than going and taking my chances. You're cleaning the .38 revolver Kelly gave you months ago, checking the mechanism and counting the rounds in your possession. At least this way, there's a possibility of negotiating a solution that keeps our family safe. What if there isn't? What if Kelly has already decided that you're too dangerous to keep alive? The question hangs in the air like smoke from a guttering candle. You've been asking yourself the same thing since Jackie delivered Kelly's message, trying to calculate odds and possibilities in a situation where information is scarce and mistakes are fatal. Then we leave Cornwall, you say finally. Tonight, before Kelly's people can prevent us. Take your mother and whatever we can carry, get on the next ship to Canada or Australia. Start over somewhere Kelly's organisation has no influence. Run away? Tom's voice carries the incredulity of youth confronted with adult pragmatism. Survive. There's a difference, though it's sometimes hard to see from the inside. You finish cleaning the revolver and check that it loads smoothly. Your mother's health is finally stable, we have enough money saved to make a fresh start, and there are places in the world where London gangsters can't reach. Sometimes retreat is the only victory available to men in our position. But even as you speak the words, you know that running away isn't really an option. Mary's improvement depends on medications that might not be available in remote colonies. Tom's education would be interrupted just as he's reaching the age where it matters most, and the cottage that sheltered your family for generations can't be packed up and transported across oceans. Besides, men like Kelly have long memories and longer reaches. Fleeing to Canada might buy time, but it wouldn't eliminate the fundamental problem that you've seen too much, and know too many operational details to be safely ignored. Criminal organisations don't usually allow former employees to retire gracefully, especially employees who've demonstrated the capability for independent action. The meeting takes place 3 days later at a pub in Bodmin that Kelly has chosen for its isolation and its lack of witnesses who might remember inconvenient details. You arrive early and take a table near the back exit, positioning yourself where you can see both the front door and the route to your boat, which waits in a nearby creek with engine warm, and Tom ready to cast off at the first sign of trouble. Kelly arrives precisely on time, accompanied by 2 men whose expensive clothes don't quite hide the bulges of shoulder holsters. He's dressed for business rather than violence, but you notice that his companions remain standing while he sits, positioning themselves to control the pub's exits and observe the surrounding area for potential threats. Understand you've been freelancing, Kelly begins without preamble. Taking independent action without proper authorization or coordination with organizational priorities. My son was kidnapped. I took action to recover him when your organization decided he wasn't worth the expense of proper rescue operations. You keep your voice level, professional, the tone of a man discussing business rather than life and death. Your son was a junior employee whose capture created certain complications for ongoing operations. Rescuing him required resources that might have been better allocated to protecting more valuable assets. Kelly signals the bartender for whiskey, expensive stuff that probably costs more than most Cornwall fishermen earn in a month. But that's water under the bridge now. What concerns me is the precedent you've established. What precedent? Independent military action by local assets. Unauthorized coordination between different operational cells. Demonstration that Cornwall fishermen can organise effective combat operations without London oversight. Kelly's pale eyes are harder than you've ever seen them. That kind of independence threatens the command structure that keeps this organisation functioning efficiently. The conversation continues for 20 minutes, touching on organisational loyalty, chain of command, and the importance of maintaining proper discipline among geographically dispersed assets. Kelly's language is business-like, almost corporate, but the underlying message is clear. Your rescue of Tom has been interpreted as mutiny, and mutiny requires correction. What kind of correction? You ask, though you already know the answer. the kind that demonstrates to other local assets that unauthorised action carries consequences, even when that action achieves tactically successful results. Kelly finishes his whiskey and signals his companions to move closer to your table. Nothing personal, you understand? Simply good business practice. The shooting starts when you overturn the table and draw your revolver in the same motion. Muscle memory from months of carrying weapons overriding conscious thought. Kelly's men are professionals, but they're also confident in their superiority over a simple fisherman who stumbled into their world. That confidence costs them the split second that makes the difference between kill shots and near misses. Your first bullet takes the nearest gunman in the chest, spinning him around and sending his pistol skittering across the pub's stone floor. The second shot misses Kelly but forces him to dive behind the bar, giving you the opening you need to reach the back door. Kelly's surviving companion gets off 2 shots as you're escaping, one splintering the door frame and the other burning a groove across your left shoulder. Tom has the boat's engine running when you reach the creek, blood soaking through your jacket and the sound of pursuit echoing through the darkness behind you. The Mary Catherine leaps forward as you scramble aboard, her familiar hull cutting through water that reflects no lights except the stars overhead. "Where to?" Tom shouts over the engine noise. "Home," you reply, though you both know that Penven will never be home again in any meaningful sense. We get your mother and whatever we can carry, then we disappear before Kelly's people can organise a proper search. The ride back to Penven takes 2 hours, running without lights through waters you've navigated since childhood. Your shoulder aches where Kelly's gunman creased it, but the wound is superficial, more spectacular than serious. What worries you more is the knowledge that you've just declared war on an organisation with resources and connections far beyond anything a Cornwall fishing village can muster. Mary takes the news with the calm acceptance of a woman who's been expecting disaster for months. She packs quickly and efficiently, selecting only what can't be replaced. Photographs, letters, her mother's wedding ring, documents that prove your family's existence to bureaucrats who might ask uncomfortable questions about identity and citizenship. "Where will we go?" she asks as you're loading the boat with supplies for an extended voyage. "Ireland first, then maybe Canada or Australia. Somewhere Kelly's organisation doesn't have influence. Somewhere we can start over without looking over our shoulders." You check the Mary Catherine's fuel tanks and confirm that you have enough diesel to reach Cork or Dublin if the weather holds fair. Will we ever come back? The question hangs in the salt air like a prayer offered to an unforgiving God. You look around the harbour that's been your world for 43 years, at the cottages where your ancestors lived and died, at the cliffs where you played as a child and learned the rhythms of tide and weather that have shaped your family for generations. Probably not, you admit. Men like Kelly don't forget, and they don't forgive. Coming back would mean putting your life and Tom's life at risk for the sake of nostalgia. You cast off just before dawn, the Mary Catherine carrying everything that remains of your family's connection to Cornwall. Behind you, smoke rises from the direction of the village, and you don't look back to see what's burning. Kelly's people work efficiently when they're making examples of those who challenge organisational authority. The passage to Ireland takes 18 hours through seas that alternate between calm and rough, testing the Mary Catherine's seaworthiness and your navigation skills one final time. You make landfall at a small fishing port near Cork, just another boat among dozens seeking shelter from weather or work. The harbour master asks no questions about your cargo or your reasons for crossing from Cornwall, accepting your story about mechanical problems and family business with the indifference of a man who's learned not to inquire too closely into other people's affairs. You sell the Mary Catherine to a local fisherman for half what she's worth, keeping only enough money to buy passage to Canada and start over in a country where your past won't follow you. The boat that's been your livelihood, your pride, and your connection to generations of Cornwall fishermen disappears into another man's ownership as easily as morning mist disappears before the sun. The train to Dublin carries you away from the sea for the first time in your adult life through countryside that's green and prosperous but alien to eyes accustomed to granite cliffs and salt spray. Mary sleeps against your shoulder, exhausted by the journey and the medications that keep her lungs clear. Tom stares out the window with the expression of someone who's seen his childhood end abruptly and violently. "Do you regret it?" Tom asks quietly as the train pulls into Dublin's Kingsbridge station. Getting involved with the smuggling, accepting O'Malley's first offer, everything that followed? The question requires more honest self-examination than you're prepared for, touching on choices made from desperation and consequences that spiraled far beyond anything you could have predicted. You think of Billy Tremaine and Jack Penrose, dead for the crime of insufficient cooperation with forces beyond their control. You think of the weapons you've moved and the purposes they've served, of the violence you've participated in and the violence you fled. "I regret that it was necessary," you say finally, but necessity doesn't change reality. Your mother needed medicine, our family needed income, and the legal economy of Cornwall couldn't provide either. Everything else followed from those facts. And now we start over, in a place where the sea provides fish instead of requiring compromises, where young men can find honest work that pays living wages, where families don't have to choose between starvation and criminality. It's a hopeful vision, though you're not entirely certain such places still exist in the modern world. But hope is what you have left after losing everything else to the tides of economic necessity and criminal violence that have transformed Cornwall's ancient fishing communities into battlegrounds for metropolitan gangsters. The ship to Halifax leaves on the evening tide, carrying emigrants who've decided that the old world no longer offers sufficient opportunities for honest prosperity. You stand at the rail as Ireland's coast fades into the distance, thinking about the cottage you'll never see again, the waters you'll never fish, the graves you'll never visit. Mary joins you at the rail, her breathing easier than it's been in years thanks to medicines bought with smuggling money. "Do you think we'll be happy in Canada?" she asks. "I think we'll be safe," you reply. And sometimes safety is the foundation that happiness requires. Tom remains below decks, perhaps unable to watch his homeland disappear, or perhaps simply unwilling to acknowledge that this exile is permanent. At 18, he's old enough to understand that choices have consequences, but young enough to believe that consequences can somehow be reversed through will or luck or divine intervention. But you know better. You've learned that the sea gives and takes according to its own logic, that storms don't care about human plans or desires, that survival often requires accepting losses that seem unbearable until the alternative becomes clear. The boy who once mended nets by lamplight in a Cornish fishing cottage is gone as completely as if he'd drowned in the Atlantic. What remains is a man who's learned the true cost of prosperity built on compromise, of safety purchased through violence, of family loyalty tested by impossible choices. The ship's engines throb steadily through the night, carrying you toward a future that will require new skills, new identities, new ways of understanding the relationship between necessity and morality. Behind you, Cornwall recedes into memory, taking with it everything you once believed about the difference between honest work and criminal enterprise, between legitimate authority and organised violence, between the men who fish the sea and the men who profit from its hidden currents. In 6 days, you'll reach Halifax and begin the process of becoming Canadian citizens, of finding work that doesn't require weapons or midnight meetings, of rebuilding lives that were destroyed by the economic forces that turned fishermen into smugglers and smugglers into exiles. The Mary Catherine will work other waters under another name, the cottage will shelter a different family or stand empty until time and weather claim it, and Penven will remember you only as another fishing family that disappeared into the vast Atlantic anonymity that has swallowed so many before you. But tonight, as the ship carries you toward an uncertain future, you stand at the rail and listen to the sound of waves against steel, thinking about the price of survival and the weight of choices made from love rather than wisdom. The sea that gave you life has finally taken everything else, leaving only the knowledge that sometimes the greatest courage lies not in fighting the tide, but in recognizing when it's time to swim toward a different shore.